Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I have a fantastic speaker and parent and advocate who's going to help us understand how do you help autistic kids who have OCD. Jan Stewart has so much lived experience dealing with the struggles of having multiple kids with co-occurring issues. She is a highly regarded mental health and neurodiversity advocate. She has written an incredible, honest memoir called Hold On Tight, A Parent's Journey Raising Children with Mental Illness. And she describes her emotional roller coaster parenting two kids with multiple mental health and neurodevelopmental disorders. She is on a mission to inspire and empower parents to persevere through the most difficult times and have hope, as well as better educate families and friends and healthcare professionals, educators, even employers. She chairs the board of directors at Carey's Place Autism Services, which is Canada's largest autism services provider. She was previously vice chair at the Centre for Addiction and Mental Health. She has spent most of her career as a senior partner with the global executive search firm Egon Zehnder, which I might have mispronounced. She is a fantastic and motivating speaker. We actually had her come to the AT Parenting community, which is my membership community. And I do like to bring in guest speakers when I can who can speak with more expertise in areas that are out of my wheelhouse. And I'm certainly not an autistic therapist or an autistic specialist, although it does overlap. And we have lots of people in the community who have kids with a lot of co-occurring issues and struggles. And so I do bring in guest speakers, and she was a phenomenal guest speaker. We had a really big show up? Is that wrong? That's probably the wrong word. Whatever. My brain's not. I need to drink more coffee. But we had a big turnout. I think that's the right word for her. And it really was the first time I've gotten so many emails and feedback from parents, like wanting her email address and wanting to reach out and thanking me for having her on. So because that was so successful, and it was a nice intimate setting where people could ask her direct questions, and I love the intimacy of the AT Parenting community, but I did want to bring her on the podcast just so that you guys can experience her as well and tap into her inspiration, but is her realistic inspiration, I think. So before we get started though and dive into that, a couple of announcements. I do want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they are available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. You can schedule a free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I'll also leave a link in the show notes. We also have the AT Parenting community is currently open right now. We only open it a few times a year so that we can focus on the members inside the community. It is kind of disruptive when you have new members trickling in all the time. And so we made the decision to open it up a few times a year. And that way we can do like a new member Zoom call. We can really invite the new members. The members that have been currently there know that there's new members there to extra support them. So that is happening right now. We do close the doors for the AT Parenting community on Thursday, November 21st, 2024, depending on what year you're listening to this. You can check it out at atparentingcommunity.com. If you're listening to this outside of that window, like many of us do with podcasts, you can go to the website and see if it's open, because we do open it 4 times a year. And then we open it sometimes in between when our wait list gets too big. But you can get your name on the wait list and you'll be the first ones to know. But if you're listening to this the week of the 18th, you're in luck because it is open for the next 3 days, including today, Tuesday. So check that out in the AT Parenting community. There is so much that we offer, so I'll try to just give you a bit of a snapshot of it. We do weekly live classes on Zoom. We do monthly support group calls for kids, teens, and parents, 3 separate calls on Zoom. We have a member-only website, and in that member-only website, there's replays of all the calls, all the classes. We have hundreds and hundreds of classes, so it's like a library. But you also get free access to my online courses, a lot of the big ones: how to teach kids to crush OCD, how to teach kids to crush anxiety, my space study course on how to systematically pull back your involvement with anxiety and OCD, how to handle difficult behavior caused by anxiety or OCD, how to handle moral OCD. These are all courses in my online school at adparentingsurvivalschool.com. Most of them $127 courses. You get access to all of that for free on the member website. So that's super cool. We also have a member Facebook group. Some people don't like to be on Facebook. You don't need to be on Facebook for this community, but we do offer it. And you are able to get into our member forums on our member website and talk to me directly. I have parents who literally talk to me every single day. They start a thread. That's a thread between me and the parent, and they check in with me every day. Or they say, hey, this is a therapist we're going to go to. What do you think? Or, hey, we're trying to do this exposure at home. What do you think? And to have that extra support, to have that warm line where you can reach out to a clinically sound professional. I'm not your therapist, but I can't turn off my therapy hat, so that you have access to clinically sound advice and guidance through the forums to directly talk to me at any time. To me, that's gold. A lot of parents are in a crisis, can't reach their therapist, and a lot of parents don't have a therapist, or they're looking for a therapist. So that is another benefit of the AT parenting community. We also have other things as well. We connect the parents offline. We have a buddy program, a parent connection program. We have hope care packages that we send out to kids that need a little extra hope. It's an ever-evolving, ever-growing community. It's nice and small. It's normally about 1,000 parents. Our live classes are about 15 to 20 parents at the most, sometimes as small as 5 parents. And so you really get the intimacy and connection of connecting with me and other parents who are in the thick of things. So join us at atparentingcommunity.com. I look forward to getting to know you, and we'll be meeting on a Zoom call really soon if you sign up now. So check that out. Okay, I want to jump back to talking about Jan Stewart. So check out her memoir, which I think is fantastic. Hold On Tight. I actually read this book in one day, and I don't like digest books like that. I normally listen to audiobooks and they take me, a few weeks to get through. It was a physical book, which I actually checked to see if there's an audio version because I just like the audio versions. There wasn't, and I sat down and I read it and I couldn't put it down. Really, really great book. So I will leave a link in the show notes to link that to where you can get that book as well. But I hope that you enjoy my interview with Jan. So without further ado, here is my interview. Well, I want to welcome Jan Stewart to the show. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Delighted to be here, Natasha.
You're just a wealth of information, and I think a message of hope, but like a realistic message, which I do appreciate about you. We had you come guest speak in the AT parenting community, and I was just telling you before we jumped on here that I have never gotten as much positive feedback from a guest speaker as I did for you. So you're a powerful speaker, and you share this wisdom that I think parents just so desperately need. So I thank you for that.
Well, I thank you.
So I want to start off with just introducing the audience to who you are. I know you. You're like an advocate in the community. You've written a fantastic memoir called Hold On Tight, which I actually devoured in one night. And I'm not that it's, a small book, but I don't normally sit down and just read a book in one sitting. But I think that says something about how captivating your story is, how well written it is, and just how relatable it is for so many parents who are raising kids with anxiety, OCD, and co-occurring conditions. So let's start off with your story, if we can. If you can give people a little background about.
Be happy to, because you're right. I'm a parent, but I'm also a speaker, an author, and an advocate, and a governance expert in both mental health and neurodiversity. So we can talk about that later. But I have 2 amazing children, Andrew and Ainsley, both of whom have multiple complex mental health and neurodevelopmental conditions. But I think given the audience today, I'll probably likely focus more on Andrew because he's my child with OCD, among other disorders and conditions. So both the kids are grown now, but from almost the time they were born, my husband David and I, we felt something's not right. Andrew had many neurodevelopmental markers that we now know are there, but of course, as a first-time parent, I didn't know. His hands and feet moved in constant circular motion. He never gurgled, talked to himself in his crib, played like other babies in his crib. And he ate nonstop. He had no self-control when it came to feeding. But every time I approached our doctor, and I know this will ring true with many listeners, he turned to me and said, Jan, calm down. You're a first-time parent. You're triple type A, overly vigilant, worrying excessively. Your kids are going to be just fine. Just calm down. Essentially, I was the problem. And I think, unfortunately, that's far too common. But from this, by the way, I learned a key lesson, and that was to trust your gut as a parent. And we can talk about that later. But fortunately, I didn't listen to him. I trusted my gut, and I kept looking. And over the next several years, David and I had increasing concerns about both kids. There was impulsivity. There was distractibility. There was sky-high anxiety. Ainsley, who was mischievous and fun and a rule breaker and loved sleepovers with her friends, suddenly couldn't make it through the night with one, needed to come home, was terribly homesick and anxious. And Andrew would worry about anything and everything. It was just nonstop. There were vocal and motor tics. There were learning disabilities. And there was regressive behavior. So Andrew could no longer maintain eye contact. He started being a restrictive eater, eating only smooth foods without texture. And he had terrible, terrible difficulty with change and transitions between activities. He would have, it was called a tantrum in those days, but it was much more than a tantrum. If we suddenly decided to go swimming instead of bowling, there would be a major meltdown. If one of his friends couldn't come over at the last minute, major meltdown. And so it went from there. But our doctor continued to discount everything I brought up. And he knew, by the way, that I was a very senior business person in Toronto. So I was accomplished, I was educated. Not that that means parents need to be that. Education we'll talk about because that is important. But he still discounted anything I said. I remember him saying, look, both kids have learned to read and write with their peers. They're cheerful and outgoing. They're just sensitive under a bit of stress. And so you're bewildered because I was brought up, I don't know about you, Natasha, I was brought up to trust the doctor. He was the medical expert. He knew better. I didn't know anything. But we were oddly fortunate, and I'll come back to those two words. Shortly after Andrew's 9th birthday, we were on vacation in the Laurentian Mountains north of Montreal at the kid's grandmother's house, and they were happily playing. And the next morning, he erupted, and I mean erupted, into a violent, frightening meltdown. He was kicking and screaming and ranting and raving, swearing at us. You couldn't get near him physically, and he punched holes in walls. And this went on for 2 hours and continued virtually unabated for the next 9 months, almost every day. And to top it all off, within 1 month, there was sudden onset of nonstop compulsive rituals. So many of the textbook rituals that we all know about, he would touch walls repeatedly for hours. He would sweep the floor continuously. He would tap shoulders. He would put things in order. He hoarded objects. He brought home glass shards and put them under his bed, as I found out. And they kept changing and escalating. So outside, he would start rubbing his head against shrubs and car tires and poles. And on the subway, he would get down on all fours and try to gnaw it repeatedly. And he even put knives in his mouth, which was the scariest, in order to, quote, feel them. I felt like it was absolutely in the twilight zone. But the reason I said we were oddly fortunate is that at least his OCD at that point was quickly diagnosed. He told me in hindsight he had been hiding it for a number of years, but it had burst forward. He didn't understand it. He was miserable, pleading for help. We were just bereft, didn't know what was going on. So that was diagnosed. But David and I knew there was more. And it took another 9 months with those continuing meltdowns, rages, behavior escalation, and emotional dysregulation to find a psychiatrist who fully diagnosed him. So in addition to severe OCD, autism, Tourette syndrome, ADHD, developmental disabilities, and learning disabilities. And his younger sister, at first we thought, is Ainsley just copying Andrew because she adored him? He was her idol, but her behavior was so vastly different. He was rule bound and wanted to please everyone. She could have cared less. She was reckless. She was unruly, disruptive at school. She would swear at teachers who she didn't feel supported her. She was constantly at the principal's office. But that same psychiatrist also diagnosed Ainsley at the same time. So he was 9, she was 7, and she was diagnosed not with OCD, but with severe anxiety, mood and anxiety disorders, actually, learning disabilities, also with very severe ADHD and executive function deficits and learning disabilities. So that's how we started.
Yeah, and that's a lot on a parent's plate. But I think there's some commonalities in your story of just that being discounted and like knowing in your gut, your parental gut, that there's something off. And I think this also depends on your personality as a parent. How far do you push that? Do you just listen to authority and you say, they're the experts, I'm going to just listen to them and do what they say? Or like when I was reading your memoir, like there was this tenacity that you had. And I think that comes down to sometimes our personality, our own childhood, our own backgrounds, our own mental health, as far as how much do we second guess the experts and keep pushing and trusting ourselves, because you did get into the right people that got the right diagnoses, that at least got your journey started. Where I feel like a lot of parents that I've worked with in my community don't do that. Sometimes the first time they start to feel empowered is when they join my community or they hear my podcast and they're or anybody shines a light on them trusting their gut and empowering them to be like, no, go get a second opinion, go find another specialist. So I do love that you were able to do that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with your own self-confidence too, not just personality. I knew no one. There were no remember, my kids are grown now. So when this happened, there were no online communities. I didn't know anyone in Toronto who was going through this because we didn't have a name for any of these behaviors at the time.
Yeah.
But I strongly believe that we parents and caregivers know our children best. And of course, you have to listen to your doctor and parenting experts and anyone else you chat with. But if what they say doesn't resonate with you, keep looking. You deserve nothing less.
Yeah, because getting the wrong diagnosis or having your child misdiagnosed will get you down a rabbit hole that, especially with OCD and having an autistic child, that getting mislabeled can, or even your daughter, difficult behavior and just being oppositional defiant instead of realizing there's, all these other issues underneath that.
Yeah.
So I want to talk in general terms. I get this question a lot, and that's why I was really excited to connect with you, because I'm like, now I have a go-to person. I can just say like, hey, talk to Jan, or listen to this podcast, or reach out to you. A lot of parents, and I'm finding an uptick in my communities where kids are autistic and have co-occurring conditions. So they're winding up in my community because of the anxiety and OCD, but they're presenting a bit different. The parents are having struggles that are, I would say, almost unique to that makeup of raising an autistic child with the anxiety, OCD, Tourette's, ADHD, all that umbrella stuff that goes with it. I wonder if you can speak about that as far as how, I'll just tell you the common questions that I get.
Sure.
The first one and the most common one is how to flesh out and just decipher what is autistic behavior and what is OCD behavior, because they both look very rigid. They both are very routine oriented.
That's exactly right. So there's no question that it's messy and complicated. I wish I could tell you it was easy. And there are a dearth of clinicians and professionals who are qualified to deal with both, but they do exist. And the good news is that there's greater awareness and training now is what we're seeing. However, I think what you see on the surface in autism and OCD in particular is that there are seemingly similar behaviors, although they're not. So you will see what's called RRBs, repetitive and restricted behaviors, and you'll see restricted interests with a hyper focus on trains, birds, the sky, whatever it is. That can occur in both. But at the core, the major difference is that with OCD, we know that these behaviors, the obsessive thoughts, the compulsive rituals, cause huge anguish, shame, unhappiness, distress. And the child knows it's not part of who they are, but they want to get rid of it and they don't know how. They're desperate. They're very unhappy, as we are, obviously. Well, in autism, many of these behaviors are self-regulating, calming, soothing, can even provide pleasure. And many autistic children cannot, and Andrew among them has a lot of difficulty separating himself from whatever is going on, whereas most non-autistic children can. So there are modifications in therapy that have to happen, and sometimes medications as a result, but that's the core difference.
Yeah, and I think that's just a really great way of putting it, because that makes so much sense. And you're touching on my next question. Is I do see this fusion of, we talk about ego dystonic, where you're not aligned with the intrusive thoughts and feelings that you're having around OCD. And that's kind of an earmark of like the diagnosis, like that it doesn't align with who you are. And that is something I do see in the autistic community, is that there's less of that. There's more identifying with your intrusive thoughts and your compulsions, and harder, because when we do ERP, exposure response prevention, a type of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, speaking acronyms, that's one of the first things I do as a therapist is I externalize the OCD. We might name it. We talk about it being a glitch in your brain. Let's externalize it. And it's Mr. O. Like at my house, we all have names for all of our struggles, and we've had O Cloud and Mr. O. And some parents, not all parents, but some parents who are raising autistic kids, they'll stumble on that first part. They'll say, my child doesn't see it that way, or my child doesn't understand externalizing it, or they say, you're trying to change who I am. I hear that a lot. You're attacking who I am. Why don't you like me?
I think that's true. I think, again, in autism, more than any other condition, let's call it that I know, there's such a wide spectrum, which is why, there's the very famous saying by Dr. Stephen Shore that says, if you met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. So every child is different and unique, and you have to know that. For some kids, autistic kids, they can do it. For many, it's a struggle, and some really can't. And of course, if your child can't speak, or is minimally speaking, or shuts down when they're overwhelmed, stressed, or whatever, it becomes even more difficult to deal with. But ERP remains, exposure response prevention remains the gold standard of treatment for autistic kids with OCD and for other co-occurring conditions with OCD. They're just modifications that have to be made depending on the child's profile.
Could you give us an example of what some of those might look like?
Absolutely. So for many autistic kids, again, I'm going to do the caveat that each child is unique. Simple, concrete, concise explanations, chunking, making them shorter. Andrew has no abstract thinking capabilities. So when you give him a metaphor, or when you ask him to do something, if it goes on too long, first I'd like you to do this, and then I'd like you to go over to the table, and then I'd like you to pick up the toy. And it's way too much. You would just chunk it. Let's go to the table. He goes. All right, let's pick up the toy. So you would do that. Many autistic children respond much better to visual they're strong visual processors. So social stories, photos, what's called PECS, picture exchange communication systems, which are basically boards with photos. There can be words on them too, pictures, all kinds of things that helps with functional communication. Because many autistic children have difficulty processing information and stimuli and emotions as quickly as others, it's also a matter of perhaps more frequent and shorter sessions or more breaks. So those are just a few of the examples. Often you'll start, when an autistic child has OCD, the therapist will almost always, and the psychiatrist, or psychologist, will almost always work first on some of the autistic related behaviors to make sure that they can understand. Because if you can't follow an instruction, and this is true for ADHD as well with OCD,
Wow.
if you can't follow the instruction, is it because you're too distracted? So you can't do an exposure and face your fear? Or is it because it's that core fear? So
Yeah.
there are nuances that have to be looked at, and that's why it's so important to find a qualified professional steeped in evidence-based treatment.
Absolutely.
It used to be, again, when my kids were young, we didn't have online treatment. Now it's such a gift for those of us that live in rural communities, communities where there aren't healthcare professionals who specialize, but now you can access them. And most of them will give some kind of financial break if you can't afford it.
Well, I'd like to know those.
Yeah.
that is a rainbow, rainbow unicorn. Yeah, and I think the hard thing though is there are more clinicians that are getting skilled in working with autistic kids with anxiety, OCD, and other co-occurring conditions, but they're hard to find. I mean, I think even finding a pediatric OCD therapist is so hard to find.
So let me tell you what I did.
Okay.
Because as you can imagine, it was even harder then. The internet,
Oh,
was just in
sure.
its infancy. So I wanted to stay east of the Mississippi because Toronto is on, near the east. I called 15 or 20 hospitals. And I said, do you treat OCD? Who treats it? And I kept at it until I kept hearing the same name. And I kept hearing Dr. Joseph Biederman at Massachusetts General Hospital, who was an angel to both my kids. And unfortunately, he died last year. But you just have to persevere and be assertive. I always say be assertive, not aggressive. Put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Mm-hmm.
But just get out there and don't give up. It doesn't, all they can do is say no.
Yeah.
And you'll know also when you chat and connect with them, it's if what they're saying resonates with you. I had done also at the same time, you have to do reading about these different disorders and conditions.
Yeah.
So I went on the IOCDF, the International OCD Foundation website, read all about OCD, knew those magic words, exposure response prevention, knew enough basics. If they didn't use those terms, ERP, I wasn't interested.
Yeah.
Now, on the medication side, it was much more difficult because I didn't know what would work, but it became fairly clear when I kept hearing the same names where to go.
Yeah. And I think that it goes back to that tenacity to keep just knocking on doors and doing your own work. I think sometimes we feel like it shouldn't have, and it really shouldn't be that way, but that's the case even for health issues. My older daughter is having health issues and she has POTS and nobody knows how to treat POTS and nobody knows what it is. And it's overwhelming. And it's like deep dive on the internet, calling different doctors, listening. But I think with OCD, at least, there is this kind of like canary in the coal mine, like if they don't know what ERP is,
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's an indicator, even if, maybe they prefer ACT, acceptance commitment therapy,
Right.
or some, or SPACE, which is working on the accommodations. They should at least know ERP, and that to me is a really easy way to detect if I'm talking to someone who at least has some basic training. Are they saying the right words?
Now, if I may, let me address to those parents and caregivers who are in crisis and don't have the energy, time, or emotional reserves. And I've certainly been there to make any of those calls. You're just trying to get through the day minute by minute, not even 5 minutes by 5 minutes. In those cases, turn to a trusted family member or friend to sit with you and make those calls on your behalf. There's always a way to do it. And that's still, pat yourself on the back for that. If you recognize that you just are not strong enough at the current time to do it, you will be once it starts lifting and you start climbing out of the morass. But get a trusted ally to help you.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with like the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do the exposures. Before it was really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com. Yeah, and there is, now that there is the internet, there is more support as far as communities. In the AT parenting community, my membership community, that's a big part of what I do. I feel like my social work roots are really, shining now, where parents are like, I don't have the energy. They'll say, I can't find anyone. I'm like, where do you live? And then, so connect with someone else, whether you're in the AT parenting community, connect with me, or find a friend, or even in a Facebook group, go and talk to people and crowdsource it to get some initial support. The internet does definitely help because you have access to people. In my free public Facebook group, there's 39,000 parents. Mm-hmm. They're probably in every area of the corner of the globe. Because it's so big. So connect with those people. But I want to circle back. We're talking about how to adapt ERP, and you did bring up a couple of things that I think is really important, because I think there is no one fits all, obviously, but having a therapist gauge, where their autistic behavior will limit them. I feel like I did that as well. Are they literal? Are they abstract? Are they going to get my metaphors? Is it landing in a way that tells me they're not understanding anything? Because I think OCD therapists in general are very metaphor driven. We speak in metaphors, we externalize the OCD, very abstract. And I have had a lot of autistic kids who did perfectly fine with that. They loved naming it, and they loved, and then there were others where they were they'll say, people say, it goes in one ear and out the other. And so I just put gum in my ear, very literal. And so I do think that that's important. And I also appreciate you saying small chunks, not to overwhelm them, even if they feel like it appears like they can handle more. I think that simplicity can really help. Some parents I'm hearing are talking about like demand avoidance, that
Mhm.
their kids, they can't demand, quote unquote, them to do anything. And, there's a big movement with pathological demand avoidance, and the use of accommodation being like a positive thing, which it is a positive thing when we talk about accommodations in school or so. And in OCD we talk about accommodations as really a 4-letter word. I mean, accommodations is a
Correct.
bad thing. It's like you getting tangled up with OCD and really doing compulsions with your child. I wonder if you can speak a little bit about that.
Yes, sure. So again, this is rather murky. And I'm once I understood, because I certainly, before I was educated, accommodated Andrew's OCD. There's no question about it. I'd push him through a door when he couldn't get through a door. If he couldn't open the car handle because of germs, I'd open it and get him in because I didn't want to miss an appointment. But once I learned, I took a deep breath and I said, I'm going to be rigid about this. I'm going to be rigid. And if we couldn't go to someone's house, or if we were late to an appointment, we were late. If we had to reschedule, we did. And if the person didn't understand, they weren't going to be part of my community. I was very strict about it. But life intercedes, and sometimes you have no choice but to accommodate. So I think we do have to forgive some accommodation, but just do it when you absolutely have to. I think the key is you want to be your child, no matter what age they are, whether they're 7, 9, 14, 21, or 37, be their treatment partner. And doing that will not fuel the OCD. So that's on the accommodation side. I gave an example to your parenting community that I think may make this come alive. When we talk about a child being one of their duties at home is to do the dishes. And Susie doesn't want to do the dishes. Well, is it because there's a contamination fear, OCD? She doesn't want to touch dirty plates, or is it because there's a sensory aversion to the feel of the dirty plate or the soap? So that's the kind of way that therapists, working with us parents and caregivers, will get at, is it OCD or is it something else?
Yeah.
And that will help in terms of knowing, should we avoid, should we not? Because sometimes in autism, those accommodations are actually self-regulating and soothing and helpful. It's part of the stimming and what goes on there.
Yeah, and there is such a difference. I wish that we were using different words, because I think that would make it easier for parents who are trying to navigate both worlds and are getting information from the autistic world and they're getting information from the OCD world. And there's really no one, well, besides yourself and maybe Dr. Rachel Sachs, there's not anyone like very vocally combining the two for parents on a platform or whatever.
Now, I would say for those of you who are not members or are not active in the International OCD Foundation, the IOCDF has several special interest groups, and anyone can join them. I belong to 2 special interest groups. I belong to OCD and autism, and I belong to tic disorders with OCD, and they're so helpful. They have meetings online. They have experts speak. You learn a great deal. They have different panels. I'll be speaking there later next year. All kinds of things. So I'm constantly learning, even at this stage. It's never ending. And it's so important to stay current. Latest findings, therapeutic approaches, medications. And we haven't talked about meds, but meds are another complicating factor with co-occurring conditions in OCD, because many kids, particularly autism, ADHD, when those kids have OCD, they often don't respond to first-line treatment, SSRIs, because of severe side effects with often irritability, impulsivity, behavior outbursts. But as I mentioned when we chatted last time, it's fascinating. What I've learned from the experts is that these same kids grow up and they can tolerate and really respond well to the SSRIs. It's fantastic to see. So those complicating factors are still there. Every psychiatrist that I've talked to who is really knowledgeable about says we still start with first-line treatment. And if it doesn't work, we then look at what else we can do.
Yeah, definitely a bumpier road when we're talking about medication because of all those sensitivities. And I know my son is super sensitive to medication, more because of PANS, but
yes.
And so it's a trial and error, which can be a bit exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
When I read your memoir, Hold On Tight, the amount of stuff that you had to go through, like even just reading it, I was like, oh my gosh, this would have broken me. Just so much intense behavior. I think behavior exhausts me more than, like internal struggles, like the physical stuff. I mean, I only have one child that has gotten dysregulated and aggressive and hard to control and scare. I really related when, Andrew was like inadvertently like having an impact on his sister, because I feel like that dynamic happens at my house too. Now that my youngest daughter is 13 and her brother's 15, they're 2 years apart as well. She's become very vocal about the trauma that it's caused her, that she's, her whole life has had to lock herself in a bedroom. Her whole life she was the target of his anger. And there's still a lot of healing to be done because of that. So I wonder, it's a big question, but I wonder, I didn't mean to jump into the sibling part, and also like how it impacts other kids in the house.
Mm-hmm. And you've mentioned something. Let me tell you, both my kids have been impacted in different ways. So when Andrew was 9 and going through those really frightening, violent meltdowns, I came home one day from work and found Ainsley hiding in the closet, shivering in fear. And that was a real wake-up call for David and me. And we started spending whatever little time we had, and believe me, it was precious little, doing, I think, 4 things. 1, activities one-on-one that she enjoyed. Must be activities that the child enjoys, not what you enjoy. In her case, she was a tomboy, so it was playing hockey. We're Canadian. It was soccer. It was baking together. It was board games like Candyland. We had a wonderful, no longer around, urban farm program for siblings in trauma. And we sent her there, and it started her on a lifelong love of animals and gave her desperately needed respite. We sent her to sibling support groups. But most importantly, probably we sat down with her. In the book, I shout out about the importance of talking openly with our children. So we sat down with her, and in age-appropriate language, of course, really went into a lot more depth about what was going on with Andrew. It wasn't his fault. He couldn't help it. This was an illness. We're working on getting it better. And we're all partners in this. He loves you. He needs you. You love him. You need him. I understand it's scary. We reaffirmed it, but we demystified it and made it less frightening. Now, on the other end, when Ainsley was a teenager, she at some point started cutting herself. Now, it was superficial, but cutting her arms and wrists. This was in her second year at university, and it was quite scary. And she was away at university, so luckily she came home. But it was very scary. She was aggressive with me. She would get in my face, and I became physically scared until we were able to regulate her. And Andrew wanted to step in between us and protect me. But he knew, and we talked very openly about it. And she hated herself more than anyone else for doing it once she calmed down. So these things are all so common, and there is trauma, and you have to talk openly about it. And that really is the key to me. Acknowledge it. Let your children know, no matter what age they are, that they're valued and understood.
Yeah, I love that. I do feel like that honesty and that conversations and not keeping things bottled up and giving your other child, I mean, how every person in the family is impacted on a different level. And so connecting one-on-one with each person to process that and validate their feelings is so important.
And beyond that, for us parents and caregivers, I think the key for me, look, I've faced lots of anger, fear, resentment, why me? Yeah. I've wanted to run away and hide many a day. But something clicked a number of years ago, and it's a mantra I live by. And that's to learn to accept, not necessarily embrace like social media would have you do, but accept the fact that your life may not be as planned for or hoped for in many ways, but it will be a meaningful, purposeful life.
Yeah, and that acceptance is so key. And I feel like that is something that is hard for a lot of parents to do, because I think people misinterpret that as, you want me to accept the fact that they're debilitated, or you want me to accept the fact. And I think what it really is, and what I say to myself, is it's not accepting and falling down and not working on it. It's accepting where we're at so that I can still feel the fullness of life, because crises will happen. And I think a lot of times as parents, we hold our breath and say, when this is over, we'll all relax, or we'll all enjoy life again. And it's a journey. It's a lifelong journey. I mean,
correct.
My daughter's 21, and you think, oh, you're going to leave the house and now you're going to be great and you're going to be on your own. No, now it's another journey. Like, now it's on far away and I can't help her, and she's calling me panicking, and there's only so much you can do. And so it's just, I think that acceptance of where you are currently at is a very healing, grounding philosophy to have. It's a daily practice, I feel like.
Yeah, and it goes beyond that, Natasha. Part of resetting those expectations for your life is recalibrating the expectations of support you can expect to receive from family and friends, and learning to navigate around and limit your engagement with family members. You can't get rid of them, but learn to limit your interaction with those who are critical, judgmental, or I always say the worst are the ones who think they have all the answers. My mom would lecture me, Jan, if you and David were just stricter parents, or the old Nike slogan, just do it, tell them to just do it. It doesn't work that way. Or, there are lots of, I had another relative, when Andrew was given a powerful antipsychotic that stopped those meltdowns in their tracks, within 2 days, he started gaining, as a side effect of the medication, 3 pounds a week. And it was concerning. And she turned to me in the middle of this and said, well, Jan, you don't want a fat child. And I thought, do you not understand what I'm going through? So you get that. That's with the family side. With friends, I'm sorry. I know it's lack of awareness and lack of education that drives those fear, misunderstandings, and stigma. Shed them if they're not truly supportive. It can be extremely difficult and upsetting. I've had it happen many times. But if you're like me, you'll find a silver lining in other parents and caregivers of similar kids. Such a warm, welcoming community. And to this day, that's who I turn to.
Yeah, that's such a good point, because your support system is literally everything. And you have to audit your support, and you have to say, I have a finite amount of energy to expend, and I need to make sure that I'm surrounded by people that don't deplete my energy. Correct. Because you really just, I feel like I covet my energy, and I have to be so protective of it, because I know that it's very limited. And so you get very picky about who's going to be part of your support system, and setting firmer boundaries and discarding some relationships that are not serving you or your family, which can be hard in itself.
Yes, and that flows into also your partner, whether you're married or living with someone. It's so important as part of resetting those expectations to be kind to one another. I've heard, and I'm sure you've heard, so many parents blame one another, accuse, undermine each other. Well, I know your father said that, but we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. And there can be major disagreements about everything from diagnoses and discipline to therapy and medications. I find medications in particular cause great explosions. One parent may not believe in meds. Another may not believe their child needs them. And there's understandable concern about side effects. I get that. But I always say, your children have inbuilt antenna. They know when their parents aren't on the same page. David and I, there's no question we want to throttle each other from time to time. I think, he's very slow to respond, at least in relation to my pace. He's very accommodating. He doesn't want to he avoids conflict. And he rightfully looks at me and says, well, you're overly decisive, overly rigid, but at our core, we trust one another. We lean on one another. We even joke about the genesis of the kids' disorders. David has a restless leg. And so I point at him and go, aha, ADHD. And he points right back at me with my perfectionist tendencies and says, OCD. So we joke about it, but we do give each other the benefit of the doubt. And I think the key is to try to accept the fact that your partner is doing their best, whether it's what you would do or not. And that will allow you to try and carve out satisfying lives together.
Yeah, so important. And I think a lot of times partners don't work on the relationship because they think that's not a front burner issue, and so they don't invest the time to talk about things or to work on these struggles or any animosity that's building because one partner is not doing what the other partner wants them to do in relation to these struggles. And it's the foundation that's everything else is built on. If there's someone else in your house, that is also dictating how you approach your kids and you're feeling resentful or the other person's feeling resentful, that will percolate and crack that foundation. So important to get support, have conversations alone behind closed doors, and even get a therapist if you need it to help navigate
Absolutely.
as well.
Absolutely true. You've got to. And again, sometimes it's not even not investing in the relationship, it's because you have no time. You're so depleted and you're so drained by what's going on that you can barely talk. And again, forgive yourself in those moments. But overall, I make many, many mistakes, and some of them I really shake my head at. I'll give you 2 examples. When I found Ainsley hiding in the closet during Andrew's meltdown, I really was upset for months at myself because I knew I should have protected her better. But later, when Andrew was graduating from high school, he went to a special high school, and he had read about MIT. Now, Andrew couldn't go to a regular high school, much less a community college. And he decided he wanted to go to MIT. And I had to tell him the truth. David and I had always really infused in the kids and done it well. They internalized it. You're not going to be limited by your issues. And so Andrew thought he could do anything and everything. And he really resented me when I told him the truth, that he wouldn't be a candidate for MIT. He resented me rightfully. And I looked back on it and said, why did I give him such unrealistic dreams? And was upset at myself because I had overdone the you can do anything. But you try to forgive yourself for your mistakes. Not easy. And you remember always, please, to pat yourself on the back. What you're doing, no matter what it is more than enough. You are your child's champion, and that's what you've got to remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And self-compassion is a really important part of this process because I think we can ruminate and we can tear ourselves down every night and just deplete our energy more. And I always say to myself, like, every day's a new day. Like, that was yesterday. You do the best that you can with what you have in the moment. And sometimes it's not going to be 100%, but that's part of the journey. It is exhausting, and you're going to make decisions that you regret later, but we're all human.
Yeah, and this means your marriage may not be, or partnership may not be what you expected again or planned for. David and I can't take vacations together. One of us always, even though our kids are grown, one of us always has to be here. Maybe we can go away for a day or two with support, but we're in the office, my phone on 24/7, and everyone in the office always knew that if either child needed me, no matter who I was meeting with, I'd go. So you do that. We're never going to have the luxury of retiring in the sun or traveling extensively, but that's okay. We've made peace with it. And I really love what I'm doing now in terms of the advocacy and the governance and giving back and paying it forward. And to me, that makes all the difference and makes my life meaningful.
Yeah. And finding meaning, in this pain is so good when you can do that. And you're doing fantastic work.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate your voice and your advocacy and the information that you're spreading.
Well,
So,
let me interrupt and brag about you a little bit.
oh,
I write a monthly column on autism for Today's Parent. It's online. You can just Google my name, Jan Stewart, and Today's Parent. So earlier in the month, even though it's on autism, it's OCD Awareness Week this month. So I wanted to highlight OCD. So last week, Today's Parent published my article with Dr. Robert Hudak, who's an expert in co-occurring OCD and autism at the University of Pittsburgh. And later today, I believe, or Monday at the latest, my interview with Natasha will come out, and I'm so excited about it.
oh, well, I appreciate it. I appreciate you reaching out and interviewing me. Yes, that's definitely exciting too. We'll share in the show notes, I'll share the link to your column, to your book, Hold On Tight, where they can get it. I'm sure they can get it wherever books are sold.
Widely available.
Is there any other place where people can find you?
Yeah, I'm going to be very frank. I was on social media and got off it last month. I just found there was a lot of toxic positivity. There were a lot of people who were posting just this and that. And I really want to devote myself to my advocacy, to my governance work. I chair the largest autism organization in Canada called Carey's Place Autism Services. And I'm really excited now because I'm on the IOCDF task force working to bring the organization to Canada. We're doing all kinds of exciting things and a number of other advocacy and writing. I write for many magazines and journals and speak across the world. But I think if any of your listeners want to contact me, if it's okay with you, they can reach you and you can forward it, and I'll be happy to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know a few of the AT parenting community members already asked for your contact information and
Be
to reach
happy
you.
to.
So I appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's always such a joy to talk to you.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here. Embrace life.
I hope that you found her as inspiring and helpful as I have every time I talk to her. I just think she has this way about normalizing and validating the struggle, not sugarcoating it, but also offering hope. And we all need that. We need to have that balance of feeling like we're seen and heard and that this struggle is hard, and also know that it's doable. We can get through it. And if you read her memoir, she has a lot on her plate. I got overwhelmed just reading it. I thought, oh my gosh, having both of those kids having their struggles and intensities is and was probably a lot, but she offers a glimmer of hope and she is paying it forward with her advocacy. So check out her stuff. I will leave a link to her book. I'm also going to try to find a link. So I'm going to find a link because I'm telling you, and I probably have already found it. She mentioned that special interest group through the International OCD Foundation for OCD and Autism. I did not know that existed. See, you are constantly learning, right? Learn from other people. That's what's so good about expanding your circle and talking to people outside of my little narrow focus. So I'm going to find that and I'm going to link that as well. I'm also going to link Carey's Place, the autism services in Canada, for those of you that are in Canada and were interested in looking at those services so that you can have all the things that we mentioned. I will also leave a link for the AT parenting community because that is going to close on Thursday. And so I'm really looking forward to being able to meet you in person when we do our new member phone call. So we'll check that out. If you are enjoying the podcast, don't forget to hit a star and rate it on iTunes or wherever you consume your podcast. And if you leave a review, I'll be reading your review to show my gratitude. I want to thank Blast Lover, who wrote, "Thank you, very useful, helped me a lot, thank you." Thanks for taking the time to write a review. I really appreciate that. And maybe if you write a review, I'll be reading yours next time. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.